If you've spent any time researching chronic illness, metabolic dysfunction, or modern health trends, you've likely been told a very specific story: that the human body is prone to random breakdowns, that obesity is simply an engine consuming too much fuel, and that tumors are just rogue cells turning against you. But what if we are misinterpreting the body's defensive playbook entirely? What if the things we call diseases are actually desperate, highly intelligent survival mechanisms? To help us break down this radical and highly intriguing perspective today, I am joined by a true heavyweight in the world of advanced scientific research, Patrick Coles. Patrick Coles is a leading figure in the emerging field of thermodynamic AI, currently serving as the chief scientist at Normal Computing. He also previously spearheaded quantum computing research at Los Alamos National Laboratory. His academic journey is a masterclass in shifting paradigms. He holds a master's degree in biochemistry from the University of Cambridge as a Churchill Scholar, a PhD in chemical engineering from UC Berkeley, and has completed 3 prestigious postdocs specializing in quantum foundations, optics, and cryptography. But outside the quantum lab, Patrick applies his systems-level engineering and biophysics background to a completely different frontier: human biology and toxic overload. On his YouTube channel, @OxalateWarrior, and through his Substack, he has introduced the Toxin Sequestration Theory. Today, we are opening up the black box on this theory. We're going to discuss what happens when the body is treated like a toxic waste dump, the hidden protective role of fat tissue, the true nature of cellular defense, and how using AI tools to access readily available information reveals a trail of biological breadcrumbs that might uncover the truth. Right here on Black Box Warning.
I've got a lot to say, can't hold it in this time, got no filter, I got no filter, no filter, I got no filter, no filter, I got no filter, no filter, I got no filter.
So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Patrick Coles to the channel. Welcome, Patrick. Thank you for coming. And your cancer theories are just fascinating. And so I would like to give you the floor here in a minute to just go to town and just have at it. But first, give us a little bit about your background, and I know that you're also a carnivore. So a little bit about how you came to carnivore and that sort of thing, and then just have at it.
That sounds great. So yeah, just over 2 years ago, I started the keto diet to cure my allergies, and sure enough, it did cure my allergies. And then later, about 6 months later, I switched from keto to carnivore. So I've been carnivore for a year and a half and keto for 2 years. So basically, it's been great. You know, in addition to curing my allergies, it also cured my joint pain. And I also have young kids who it's helped tremendously. It's boosted their IQ. And in particular, I had a special needs son who's no longer special needs because of the carnivore diet. And so it's been tremendously healing for me and my family. And I was fascinated by the fact that carnivore is so powerful. And of course, it's not just my story, but many other people's stories out there of healing. And I was trying to understand why it is that the carnivore diet is so powerful. And I am a scientist. I have a background in physics and engineering. I'm currently the chief scientist at a tech company where we build, semiconductor chips for AI. But I'm really passionate, in addition, about trying to understand the chronic disease epidemic. And so that's a little bit of background about myself and why I've been excited to dive into the theory of cancer as well as chronic disease more broadly.
I think a lot of us, I'll just say, a lot of us are just flabbergasted by the changes, and how powerful it is. Because I've too had 8 different medical conditions, and most of them were gone in 3 days. I took a narcotic
Wow.
for 19 years, or no, 17 years, but
Mhm.
that's crazy. So, I mean, I for one was really, really pissed off when that happened because,
Yeah.
who knew, so. But your cancer theories are fascinating. So, and
Yeah.
I'll give a little insight onto because I have similar theories to yours.
I would love to
Not
hear that. Yeah.
yeah, not
Yeah.
necessarily the nuts and bolts, but just from a common sense perspective. So, but first, I mean, just map this out for us.
Yeah. And I definitely would love to hear your theories as well. Um, should I share screen?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead, and I'll add that. Okay.
Great. So the name of my theory of cancer is Toxin Sequestration Theory, or TST. And uh, there's some, motivation or background behind this, just to set the stage, which is that, we've been told by mainstream medicine that our bodies are broken and faulty. Basically, that our genetics are faulty, our own body's tissue is malignant and selfish, and our body attacks itself. And I believe that narrative is wrong, and that in fact the human body is amazing. It's a masterpiece. It's brilliantly designed. It's very intelligent. It rarely makes mistakes. And all we have to do is kind of nourish and trust our body and allow it to make the right decisions and sort of get out of its way. So that's going to be the take-home message of this theory, is that the body is amazing. And the other message is that even though our bodies are wonderful, we are being inundated with toxicity. That's really the elephant in the room. When I've looked into these different chronic diseases, from Alzheimer's to autism to diabetes to heart disease, kidney disease, they all seem to have a connection to toxicity. Each of them can be rooted in toxicity. And sure enough, if we poll people on what is the one thing that's really increased over the past several decades, in addition to chronic disease, it's not like, say, germs have really exponentially risen in the past few decades. On the other hand, toxins are the one thing that I think people agree has significantly rose over the past several decades. And so, just to follow the trend, if chronic disease is rising and toxicity is rising, then there could be a connection there. And I believe there is a deep connection there. Um, so so that's just kind of setting the stage, and just to basically hit the audience right up front with what my theory is, and then we can dive into this in much more detail. I've mentioned the idea that the body is amazing and it knows what it's doing. So my theory is arguing that cancer is actually not a disease. Rather, it's a defense mechanism that the body does on purpose to protect itself from the toxic overload that we are experiencing in modern life. And in contrast to the mainstream theory, where I said, the mainstream is arguing that our bodies are faulty and our tissue is malignant and uncontrollable and selfish, I argue that rather a cancer tumor is tissue created by the body for the purpose of storing and processing toxins. And this serves to sequester toxins away from the normal tissue to protect the normal tissue. In other words, you can think of a cancer tumor as like a backup detox organ. Uh, and then finally, we can define precisely what is a toxin. And the precise definition of a toxin is basically something that damages the body's tissues. And in particular, it's something that creates oxidative stress via reactive oxygen species. And that's a technical term that I'll get into more. But basically, these reactive oxygen species oxidize the body from the inside out. They burn the body, and they are a root cause of chronic disease. But cancer's job is to protect the body from that. So that's the theory. It's basically 3 principles. It's simple, straightforward. And I will mention that there is a rich history behind this theory. Believe it or not, it actually dates back 2,000 years to traditional Chinese medicine. In the ancient texts of TCM, they said that tumors are containment of phlegm, blood stasis, and pathogenic toxins. So it's in their ancient texts, and believe it or not, it still persists today in traditional Chinese medicine. And then also in Western thought, more recently, we've had Agenus Vonderplanitz, who's well known for founding the raw primal diet. He wrote books on this topic, and in his books, he said that tumors act as solidified waste and toxin isolation. And more recently, Dr. Tom Cowan, who's a famous doctor, has argued that tumors act to bag up the garbage. And the person who really inspired me to look into this theory was Stephanie Seneff. She's an MIT professor. She's done a lot of research on toxicity. She's well known for writing a book on glyphosate, but she's also looked into deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen. And she showed in her research that cancer cells sequester and hoard deuterium inside them in order to protect the body from the toxicity of deuterium. And she was the one who ultimately inspired me to look into this theory. I reached out to her over email, and she was the one who encouraged me to look into this. So that's the history behind this theory. And I'll just remark, why is it that these ROS chemicals, these reactive oxygen species, play such a central role in my theory? And it turns out that there's another, doctor researcher. His name is Thomas Levy, and he's written a book called The Only Cause of Disease. And in that book, he argues that the only cause of disease is oxidative damage caused by these kinds of chemicals. These ROS are basically small oxygen-containing molecules and free radicals that oxidize the body. They burn the body from the inside out, and because these are the root cause of chronic disease, and because cancer is a defense mechanism, then cancer's job is basically to protect the body from chronic disease. And so its task, the cancer tumor's task, is to sequester toxins that otherwise would create these ROS chemicals if they were to roam freely throughout the body. So that's why the ROS plays such a central role in this theory. And because I am a scientist, I'm a physicist, I was raised that any good theory should make predictions. So what is the prediction of my theory? Well, it basically predicts that if you manage to find a chemical that does produce large amounts of these ROS chemicals in the body, then cancer cells should try to sequester, store, or process that chemical. And I encourage the audience to really go through this process. And if you find a chemical that you think might be a toxin, number one, check to see if it creates ROS in the body, and then you verify that it is indeed a toxin. And then number two, check to see if cancer cells sequester, store, or process it. And then that would be a test of my theory. And I've gone through this testing process for dozens of chemicals, glucose, fructose, seed oils, ethanol, oxalate, etc. And it's been a fun journey going toxin by toxin to check to see, are these toxins sequestered and stored by cancer cells? And this is kind of the result of my search. I think of it as like piecing together a puzzle. Each piece of the puzzle is a different toxin. And so you can see things like the sugars, glucose and fructose, as well as some toxic metals, heavy metals, some industrial chemicals like microplastics and cigarette smoke, ethanol, forever chemicals, and benzene. So I'm going to dive into some of these toxins, but I will just step back and say that many of these toxins, interestingly, since this is a carnivore audience, are actually cut out by the carnivore diet. So that was part of my motivation in studying this, was to try to understand why the carnivore diet was so good at treating chronic disease. And sure enough, things like glucose, fructose, seed oils, and also some of the toxic metals, as well as deuterium, oxalates, these are all cut out by the carnivore diet. So I'm starting to get a deeper appreciation for why the carnivore diet does work so well. And we can dive into that more. But so seed oils, like I said, that is cut out by a standard carnivore diet. And seed oils contain a fatty acid called linoleic acid. That's and it is a toxin. It creates these ROS chemicals through a chain reaction, and that and so sure enough, cancer cells should, in theory, try to sequester them, and they actually do. They upregulate these fatty acid transporters on their cell surface to rapidly pull in seed oils out of the body fluids. And, they're not using the seed oils for any purpose. Once the seed oils get into the cancer cell, they literally just store them in these lipid droplets. So there's these like lipid droplets, which are just balls of seed oils that are floating around inside cancer cells, serving no purpose other than to sequester them away from the healthy tissue. The same is true, by the way, for forever chemicals. People are familiar with, Teflon and nonstick pans and these forever chemicals that are in furniture and firefighter equipment. And it's well known that these are toxins. They do create ROS in the body. And believe it or not, the forever chemicals are also sequestered and stored by cancer cells preferentially, and they are stored in the exact same lipid droplets that they store the seed oils in. So they sort of side by side shove the seed oils and the forever chemicals into these same lipid droplets and store them for safekeeping. Iron is an interesting one because, of course, red meat has iron, but it's the heme iron form. And heme iron is not a toxin. It's very good for us. It's important for us. But non-heme iron, which is basically metal iron, that actually does act as a toxin in the body, and it creates ROS through something called the Fenton reaction. It basically produces free radicals. But in any case, where people get exposed to non-heme iron are plant-based foods like spinach, as well as iron
Cereal.
supplements. And as well
Cereal.
as the big one is cereal, huge one, absolutely, cereal, yes. So many breakfast cereals, as well as oatmeals and things like that, are fortified with iron. And it's something to watch out for. And not all iron is created equal. That's the key take-home message. So, and the body can carefully regulate the amount of heme iron in the body. It has a regulatory system for that, but it does not have a regulatory system for non-heme iron. So if you do get non-heme iron in your body, you could end up with iron overload. And when you have iron overload, that causes all sorts of problems, and the body tries to shove it away into the cancer cells. Sure enough, the cancer cells actively pull in iron by upregulating their iron receptors on their cell surface. They pull in the iron out of the body fluids. And then this is the interesting part, which is that they do not use the iron for any purpose. They literally store it for safekeeping in metal balls. So there are these metal balls inside of cancer cells that have roughly 4,000 iron atoms per ball. And then they're wrapped in a protein shell called ferritin. And then they're just floating around inside the cancer cells. This is hard to explain from the mainstream theory, because the mainstream would say, well, maybe they're pulling in iron because they really want to grow more. They're selfish, and the cancer cells just want to grow. But actually, the literature is saying that they're not actually using the iron. They're just storing it in these balls. So, next one I can mention is microplastics. This is a hot topic on social media. A lot of people talking about microplastics. RFK has been talking about it. It's really hard to explain from the mainstream theory why cancer cells would be full of microplastics, because microplastics are indeed a toxin. They create ROS. And if cancer was really selfish, why would they love storing these toxins like microplastics? But from my theory's angle, cancer is unselfish, and it's a team player, and it's part of the body's strategy. So it actually pulls in the microplastics. Naturally, there's no transporter for microplastics. So the only way the cancer cells can pull it in is through a process called bulk endocytosis. And bulk endocytosis is where the cancer cell drinks the extracellular fluid. So it sucks up the microplastics from the extracellular fluid. It basically engulfs them. And then once they're inside the cancer cells, it stores them for safekeeping in the endosomes and lysosomes. So it's literally just sucking them up and storing them. It's not using them for a purpose.
Plus, that would just want to interject. Like that would be a very weird like fuel. You know what I mean? Like if you tried to say like for the other stuff, like they're trying, it's using iron for energy or something like that, like, or it wants to grow. It's like, well, what the heck is it going to do with plastic? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So that
Yeah,
would be
and
very weird. That'd be weird to even try to defend that. So, you
exactly,
know.
right. Yeah. Same with the forever chemicals. Like there's nothing you can do with forever chemicals. So another thing, by the way, that the carnivore diet tends to cut out are mold toxins. So these, because mold tends to grow on plant-based foods. They like to eat plant carbohydrates. And so these are called mycotoxins. Basically, these are the chemical weapons of funguses. So funguses, when they fight against other microorganisms, they produce these toxins. And we get caught in the crossfire. It's toxic to us as well. Many people have been talking about how mold causes health issues. Well, this is the mechanism, these mycotoxins. And sure enough, cancer cells actually upregulate their bulk endocytosis. So just in the exact same way that they pull in microplastics, they use the same mechanism to pull in these mycotoxins. Now, the mycotoxins come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. So that's why it just uses like this non-specific mechanism to pull them in. And then once again, once those mycotoxins are inside the cancer cell, they get stored for safekeeping in the endosomes and lysosomes. And so I should mention that this is another positive thing for carnivore diet because we largely cut out the mycotoxins when we cut out the plant-based foods. Except, of course, if you have a water damaged building. If you have a water damaged building, then obviously you can still get exposed to mold through that mechanism as well. But okay, so those are basically some of the toxins that the cancer cells store, and that's because some toxins can be stored and some toxins can be processed and other toxins can't. The toxins that can't be processed are the ones I just talked about. Like the body has no real ability to, process or detoxify microplastics or forever chemicals or iron, so it literally just stores it. But fructose, on the other hand, is a toxin that can be processed. Now, some people like to think of fructose as a fuel source, but I think the liver would beg to differ. Basically, the liver is the body's detox organ. Typically things that are processed by the liver are toxins. And fructose is a good example of something that's actually processed by the liver. And sure enough, it creates tons of ROS in the body. In fact, more ROS than other sugars do. And then you can show that cancer cells actively try to pull in fructose. They upregulate a transporter called GLUT5. That transporter's job is precisely to pull in fructose. And interestingly, that transporter is basically not expressed at all in normal tissue. So normal tissue does not really express GLUT5, but cancer tissue expresses it. So that's really interesting. And so anyway, cancer cells pull in this GLUT5, and then once it's inside, they basically detoxify it in the same way that the liver would. So this raises an interesting point that it looks like cancer tissue is acting like a backup liver. And sure enough, liver damage is a very strong precursor to getting a cancer tumor. It's very common when someone does have liver damage to get cancer. And so this is a good example of a toxin that would be processed in the liver if you had a healthy liver, but then if your liver is not doing well, cancer can pick up the slack. And there's nothing more well known than ethanol when it comes to something being detoxified in the liver. So drinking alcohol is a great example of a toxin. It creates ROS in the body. It's well known to be linked to cancer, and it's also well known that the liver detoxifies ethanol. And the way the liver does that is by having these two key enzymes, ADH and ALDH. Those are the two enzymes that you need to detoxify ethanol. And sure enough, it's been shown that people who have alcohol-driven cancers, so in other words, someone who does have chronic alcohol consumption and then they get cancer, those types of cancers upregulate those two enzymes, ADH and ALDH. So it's fascinating. It looks like cancer adapts to the toxin. So it's not necessarily true that those enzymes are upregulated in all cancers, but in drinking-related cancers, those enzymes are upregulated so that cancer can detoxify ethanol and once again behave as a second liver. Yeah, so just to push this analogy further about cancer being the body's second liver, the liver views excess estrogen as a toxin because it does process excess estrogen. Of course, estrogen plays a physiological role in the body, but many of us have excess estrogen. Obesity is a driver of excess estrogen as well as exogenous hormones. And liver damage, of course, can also lead to excess estrogen because the liver's job is to process it. So, in any case, cancer tries to pick up the slack by pulling in estrogen out of the bloodstream. It upregulates its estrogen receptors, and then it also upregulates its detox enzymes, and it detoxifies estrogen very much analogously to how the liver detoxifies estrogen as well. So I've talked about basically two classes of toxins, the toxins that are stored in cancer cells and the toxins that are processed by cancer cells. There's also, interestingly, these fuel sources for cancer growth. These are very prominent in Thomas Seyfried's theory of cancer, which is called the metabolic theory of cancer. He identifies glucose and glutamine as the two key fuel sources for cancer cell growth. And I want to highlight, that I'm, very much deeply respectful of the amazing work that Thomas Seyfried has done. He's really highlighted the flaws of the mainstream genetic theory of cancer, and he's also highlighted the key role of diet in treating cancer. But I wanted to offer a potential different interpretation for the fuel cells for cancer growth. Uh, because in my theory, cancer tries to sequester toxins to protect the body. But interestingly, we can view glucose as a toxin. And it does create ROS in the body. And sure enough, the easiest way to see that glucose can be a toxin is that people who have diabetes often have tissue damage. So they often have damage to their kidneys, damage to their retinas, damage to their peripheral nerves, and damage to their arteries. And those are called diabetes complications. That's the technical word for it. But that, in my theory, is basically just a manifestation of glucose's toxicity. The fact that glucose can damage the body's tissues. So when we view things through the angle of toxicity, then we say, well, cancer is trying to protect the body from hyperglycemia, from high blood sugar, because if you have high blood sugar, then that causes tissue damage. So it's going to rapidly pull in the glucose out of the bloodstream and then try to process it. So that can explain cancer's insatiable appetite for glucose because many people do have glucose overload. And furthermore, we can reinterpret what's called Warburg metabolism as a detox strategy. So Warburg metabolism is basically where cancer cells change their metabolism from respiration to fermentation. This is well known in Thomas Seyfried's theory. And if cancer really wanted to extract energy from glucose, it would use respiration because respiration generates 36 ATPs from glucose, a huge avalanche of energy. But instead, it chooses the much more inefficient pathway, which is fermentation. That only gives cancer cells 2 ATPs of energy. So this suggests that cancer cells are not acting as a power plant. They're not trying to maximize the amount of energy that they're getting out of sugar. Instead, they choose fermentation, in my theory, as a safety precaution because it's the safe way of metabolizing glucose without generating oxidative stress, in particular, without generating the ROS chemicals. So it's really a safety precaution to minimize the amount of oxidative stress that they produce. Yeah, so that's basically my interpretation of the Warburg effect, which is that it is a safe detox pathway for glucose. And we can go to the next fuel source, which is glutamine. This is another prominent chemical in Seyfried's theory. And this is really intriguing. A lot of people found this interesting, but glutamine, it turns out, is the body's safe way of carrying ammonia in the blood. And ammonia is a small molecule. It's NH3, 4 atoms, and it is a toxin. And just beware because it does appear inside of many people's cleaning products. And so people should be aware that some cleaning products do have ammonia, and if it does, people should get rid of it because it is a toxin. Ammonia does damage the brain, the heart, the arteries. So it's something people should watch out for. And ammonia is naturally produced uh, inside of muscle cells. And the ammonia that's produced inside of muscle cells has to get from the muscle to the liver for detoxification. But if the muscle cells just dump the ammonia into the blood, they would damage the arteries and they would damage the, the heart and all the vital organs. So you can't just dump ammonia into the blood. Instead, what the muscle cells do is that they safely package the ammonia in a safe envelope called glutamine. And basically, they stick the ammonia molecule to glutamate, and that makes glutamine, and then they send off the glutamine into the blood. And in fact, glutamine is the most abundant amino acid in the blood, and it's the body's safe way of transporting ammonia. And I found this very interesting. Uh, and once the liver cells receive the glutamine, they rapidly rip off the ammonia and detoxify it. And sure enough, that's exactly what cancer does as well. Is the cancer cells upregulate their glutamine transporters on their cell surface. And by the way, as I said, liver damage is a very common precursor to getting a cancer tumor. And so the thought process here is that the cancer tumors are acting once again as a backup liver whenever the liver is incapable of detoxifying ammonia because it's damaged. Then cancer tries to pick up the slack. It upregulates its glutamine transporters, pulls in the glutamine, rips off the ammonia, and detoxifies it. And so that's a reinterpretation of why cancer cells love glutamine from the perspective of the fact that they're trying to detoxify ammonia. And I think it goes well to the carnivore community because glutamine is high in animal meat. So when we do eat animal meat, we are getting quite a lot of glutamine. And from the perspective of the metabolic theory of cancer, they're arguing that, well, glutamine fuels cancer. And so that never sat well with me because as a carnivore, that's basically telling carnivores that, oh, the muscle meat that you're eating is driving cancer. But now I feel that, at least when we view it from this angle, we're saying actually, it's perfectly fine to eat glutamine. Glutamine is not a toxin. It's not necessarily a fuel source. It just happens to be a carrier of a toxin. So now that sort of makes glutamine safe to eat. But anyway, I've talked about the sort of molecular level things, but we can now zoom out to the big picture of organs. And this is where things get pretty interesting. And it turns out that tumors tend to form in certain organs and not others. It's well known that things like prostate cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, skin cancer, liver cancer, these are very common, whereas heart cancer and spleen cancer are not common. And so I wanted to try to understand why is that true? Because from the mainstream theory, they argue that cancer is random, so you just get random genetic mutations. And in theory, that should mean you should randomly get tumors in every organ. Like we should actually see heart cancer happen, but in practice, the medicine doesn't really see heart cancer. And so I came up with some principles here to try to explain this. And in practice, what we see is that the body doesn't randomly choose locations. It's actually strategic. It tends to choose tumor locations in tissues that are most heavily burdened by specific toxins. So the liver, the kidneys, and the lungs, those are the body's primary detox organs that are exposed to toxins. And so those are so the body naturally would tend to form tumors in those tissues because those are the ones that are most heavily burdened. Similarly, the tumors often form in tissues that are best equipped to safely sequester and isolate toxins. And that's where, say, the breast, the prostate, and the colon come in. The breast is very well equipped to metabolize estrogen. And sure enough, excess estrogen drives breast cancer. And so basically, the breast tissue is very well equipped to act as a estrogen detox unit. And so for estrogen-driven cancers, a breast tumor is a very common location. Similarly, the prostate is very good at sequestering fatty acids, toxic fatty acids like seed oils. And so they upregulate their fatty acid transporters. So basically, the prostate has all the machinery that you would need in order to sequester seed oils. And in the colon, it has a large surface area and it has direct contact to dietary toxins. So it's very good at walling off these dietary toxins. So that's why the colon often appears in cancer. And we can just dive into this a little bit more in detail. Why is it that we see tons of prostate cancer and no heart cancer? It's very rare for a cardiologist to ever see heart cancer in their entire career. And the prostate, as I said, it's not an essential, it's not the most important organ. And the body is okay with sort of sacrificing the prostate in a sense because it's not the most important organ. And like I said, it's very good at sequestering uh, fatty acids that are toxic, in particular the seed oils. And so that explains why prostate cancer is so common. The heart, on the other hand, if the body was to build a heart tumor, it would immediately threaten the survival of the organism. And so the body isn't going to want to do that. And that's why my theory says that heart cancer should rarely happen because it could threaten the survival of the body. And I love this toxin organ mapping. So this is actually a way of thinking about how different toxins map on to cancers in different organs. And what's exciting about this is that it leads to actionable items that people can take. So if someone comes to us with prostate cancer, we can say, well, chances are you've been exposed to excess seed oils, excess iron, and excess oxalates. And so we can tell them like, okay, reduce those toxins because maybe chances are you have too much of those toxins. And then similarly with blood and bone marrow cancer, leukemia, it's really closely connected to an industrial chemical called benzene. And then with pancreatic cancer, it's closely connected to excess fructose and glucose. So we can go organ by organ and basically give people advice based on whatever tumor they may have that they should consider lowering these toxins. Yeah, so that's I really like that toxin organ mapping because it actually leads to actions that people can take to help themselves. And then a lot of questions come up about how can my theory explain metastasis? Because normally when people think when they think of metastasis, they think of the aggressive nature of cancer and how cancer is becoming more and more aggressive. But I just view metastasis not as cancer spreading, but rather as the body saying, I need another vault to store toxins. Basically, my primary vault is overflowing and it's just not enough to handle the toxic load that I currently have. And so it's basically strategic expansion of the number of vaults that the body is using to store toxins. And it's really hard for the mainstream theory to explain the fact that, once again, metastasis tends to occur in three primary organs: the bone, the liver, and the lungs. From the mainstream theory, you would expect metastasis to occur in every organ, but it's those three organs that are the most common: the bone, the liver, and the lungs. And we can understand this because the bone is very well equipped to handle toxic metals, heavy metals, as well as excess iron. These can be stored very easily inside the bone. So if someone has tons of excess toxic metals, then the bone can act as a metastasis. And then similarly, the liver becomes a common site because it's already really well equipped to handle toxins. It's the body's master detox organ. So it has all the machinery that you need to handle a wide range of toxins. And then the lungs are also a common site for metastasis because it has a large surface area and it's really capable of walling off toxins as well. So that can explain why certain organs are used for metastasis. And the other common thing people ask, well, why is it that cancer cells migrate? And from my theory's perspective, the body doesn't want to start from scratch. Basically, it wants to use a pre-adapted construction crew, basically proven experts, basically cells that are well adapted to sequester toxins, because it does take effort to adapt a cell and get it into sort of toxin sequestration mode. And so they're basically using their pre-adapted construction crews to start the tumor in a new site so that it doesn't have to start from scratch. I'm getting close to the end, but basically, there's a couple other points I wanted to make, which is that um, tumors are actually not a new thing. It's not something that just happened in the past 100 years. They actually have a rich history. There's fossil evidence of tumors dating back 240 million years. This is a fossil from a 240 million-year-old turtle. It's a bone tumor. And, believe it or not, tumors predate the vertebrate liver. So the liver is a newer organ than tumors are. Uh, and so we can view these tumors as kind of like ancient detox organs or primordial organs. And you might say, well, what are the toxins that these animals were exposed to hundreds of millions of years ago? Well, there was plant warfare. So the plants and the animals were constantly at war with each other, and the plants were evolving these plant toxins, and the animals had to defend themselves against the plant toxins. And similarly, there was also volcanic activity, and that was spewing out heavy metals, toxic metals. And so the animals also had to deal with these toxic metals that were just coming out of volcanoes. And so those are some reasons why these tumors evolved. And um, the key was to protect the vital organs in order to reproduce. So the animals that were able to protect their vital organs long enough to reproduce by sequestering the toxins into tumors, those were the animals that survived and had babies. Of course, they're not exposed to things like, ethanol and microplastics back then, but so we have more toxins now. So we're activating this mechanism more than they were activating it back then. But nevertheless, this was an ancient detox strategy that there's fossil evidence for. Um, I won't get in too much into the technical details, but there is a step-by-step process that it looks like the body uses to form a tumor. And the body has a sensing mechanism to detect how much ROS, basically how high the ROS levels are in specific tissues. And so it can tell basically how much oxidative stress it's under in each given tissue. There's like biochemical pathways to sense this. It uses, for example, glutathione to sense this, basically like antioxidants, things like that. So it can detect how much oxidative stress each tissue is under. And then my theory says that whenever those ROS levels get too high, the body's like, I got to form a tumor. And so I need to start sequestering things in order to reduce the oxidative stress. And so then, it starts to recruit cells for this. It, changes the metabolism, and then it starts to develop the infrastructure to support the cancer tumor. It builds new blood vessels. This is called angiogenesis. It's well known that new blood vessels are built to supply blood to the cancer tumors. It also builds a mechanical scaffold called a stroma to physically support the cancer tumor. And it's, from my perspective, it's just common sense that, like, why would the body put so much infrastructure and effort into building this cancer tumor if the cancer tumor was the enemy? Why would the body build new blood vessels and build a mechanical scaffold to support the cancer tumor if the tumor was the enemy? But that's what the body does. And we can also talk about the reverse process, which is that how do tumors naturally regress? How do they disappear? And of course, you can attack a tumor. There's 100 different ways that people use to actually unnaturally attack tumors. Of course, there's chemotherapy, there's radiation, there's 100 different toxic chemicals that people use to attack cancer tumors with. But there's one way to naturally encourage tumor regression, and that's to reduce your toxic load. So if you just reduce your toxic load, not obviously dietary toxins as well as environmental toxins, improving your lifestyle. These have been shown to actually lead to spontaneous tumor regression. Spontaneous tumor regression is a well-documented phenomenon in the medical literature. These are people who basically abstained from medical treatment, so they did not do any medical treatment. Instead, they just changed their diet, changed their lifestyle, reduced their toxin exposure, and then it's been documented that these people have sometimes had spontaneous tumor regression where their tumor just magically disappears. And it's hard for mainstream theory to really explain that. They just sort of think of it as like a miracle. But in this theory, it's basically just like, well, the body decommissions its storage vault when it no longer needs it. If it doesn't need to store toxins anymore and you're not exposing it to toxins, then the body says, well, we can get rid of that storage vault now. That's the basic idea. Um, and so, I just have one or two more slides because in the past week or so, I've been trying to extend this theory beyond cancer because I noticed basically that there's a very close parallel between fat tissue and cancer tissue. And you can think about like what are the cases where the body actually builds extra tissue? And there's two key cases: cancer and obesity. And the body, I'm arguing, doesn't make mistakes. It does things on purpose. It's brilliant. It's amazing. So anytime the body is building extra tissue, it has to have a key reason for that. And sure enough, it's been shown that normal fat tissue stores forever chemicals, microplastics, seed oils, and heavy metals. These are lipophilic toxins, and they store them in lipid droplets. I mean, not every toxin is stored inside of fat cells, but they do store a significant fraction of toxins in these lipid droplets. And we can view then, just like how we view cancer as not a disease, we can actually view obesity as not a disease, but rather a protective adaptation that the body uses to protect itself from these toxins and to store toxins as well. And what's I think exciting about that is we can basically unify obesity and cancer under one theory, basically this TST theory, and just think of obesity and cancer as sequential strategies that the body uses on a spectrum. And we can think of sort of different tiers. On the right-hand side, I show tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Tier 1 is the body's first strategy, which is store toxins in fat tissue, both belly fat as well as visceral fat. So we can even view fatty liver and these visceral fat issues also as protective adaptations, protecting the vital organs by sequestering toxins away from the organs. And so that's tier 1. And then when that fails, when that's not enough, then the body escalates to tier 2, which is a cancer tumor. And then when that's not enough, it goes to tier 3, which is metastasis, and cachexia, which is muscle wasting. So anyway, this is my last slide, but this is basically TST in a nutshell in this right-hand diagram showing the different tiers of things. So yeah, thanks. That's my slide deck.
That makes so much sense, actually. I mean, when you think about it, because the question I asked when I was, I guess I was 55, this has been 3.5 years ago that I went carnivore. And I had to go to the emergency room because I had this weird hip pain. And I had all of these other problems. And like I said, I was on a narcotic for 17 years for fibromyalgia. That's a diagnosis code. So, but the one thing I noticed, like and I was really having this weird hip pain. I didn't know what the heck was wrong with me. And so I'm asking the doctor, I kept saying, why? They couldn't even come up with anything that was wrong. They just said inflammation after, $5,000 or it was $3,000, $5,000 worth of ER visit. And they had no answers. So it was just what hit me at that time is no one asked why ever.
Right.
Like why? Why? And we're not meant to just be defective and fall apart at 55 years old. Right. That's not the way we're made, right? So this idea, and especially what's already in the literature and the things that we do know, about scientifically, about what is in these cells. Like when you look at these cells, like what's being stored there. I like the way that you're using like AI to dig into this. It's amazing because it's a powerful thing to have like all the collective knowledge at your fingertips and be able to like get it. And I think that people are not using it as much for that purpose, but it should be, and at some point I do worry that I'm wondering like when and how the censorship would occur
Right.
with because it's like, did you know that there's a genie, you know, and it's like there's this genie kind of thing going on. Like we can actually get any information, a lot of information that we want, and a lot of it's curated. Like
Mm.
if you you know, you get the LDL spiel if you actually ask it
Mhm.
about carnivore, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of that going on, but you know, it's still mainstream, but there's a lot of knowledge that we already know. We know science has already established a lot of stuff, and you can get a hold of that and easily like kind of support what you're saying. Like
Hmm.
it's not a stretch at all. But
Right.
but I've had, you know, my theory, okay, just to kind of wrap this up in a
Yeah.
nutshell from what my perspective is that in 1906 we the you know the Pure Food and Drug Act was born, and the FDA was born based on Upton Sinclair's book. Now Upton Sinclair was a socialist, and the reason he wrote the book about the meatpacking industry was he had his own reasons for it, but it was horrifying. And then after that point in time, we've been eating not food after that point. And at this point in time, there's over 10,000 chemicals that are used in food. And if you know anything about the FDA's GRAS system, generally
Hmm.
recognized as safe, I call it generally recognized as sick. This is just, it's just you know, companies are like, yeah, no, we're going to use this now, and it's good. We did studies. We swear it's honest. It's good stuff, you know. And they don't have any idea. They don't know. They really don't know anything. They don't prove anything. And a lot of people don't believe that, but that's exactly the way it works, you know. So we
Right.
have been consuming it to me it's just absurd, and it makes me so angry. It's like we've just been just putting things that aren't food in our mouth, like a toddler. You know, what do you do when you see a toddler pick up a bug or something off the floor and try to eat it? Like, you don't let them do it, right? So it's like we're just, they'll feed us anything, you know. And if you look
Yep.
at a lot of the countries, like even in the UK and Australia, Canada, they've banned a lot of these things.
Hmm.
Just completely ban them and don't allow them in food because they're so terrible. And they're just feeding. They keep feeding us this kind of stuff. It's funny that a lot of these diseases are diseases of the West,
Hmm.
which you look at what it comes from excess and eating all this garbage. It clearly comes from that. And if you look at one of the things I think is interesting, your talk about the, you know, obesity, you know, being
Hmm.
a defense mechanism type of thing,
Hmm.
and the body being intelligent. I fully agree with that. If you look back at the Apollo launch back in, I forgot what year it was. It was years and years and years ago. It was about 30, 40 years ago. And they panned the crowd. Everybody was thin. I mean, you couldn't find a fat person in that crowd, like if you tried. Then, you know, maybe 10 years ago, they had some kind of launch or something. They panned the same crowd, and it's the exact opposite. Everybody's fat. So
Hmm.
there's got to be a reason that everybody's getting so fat. And you know, you
Hmm.
can't really pin it on the whole genetic thing has been done to death. It's like, well, if we don't have a reason for it, we're just going to say it's genetic because it's this mysterious, you know, boogeyman kind of thing. But there, you know, we don't have to explain anything. So that's kind of my take on it from watching the industry. And let's face it, I mean, I forgot what year, but like cancer treatment is going to be a $210 billion
Hmm.
industry.
Right.
So, and people who look at that, if anytime I say stuff like that, they're like, well, that's just a conspiracy theory. It's like, no, that's the way the world works. Like, if you've got eight, and right now I think it's $90 billion,
Right.
it's like billions of dollars. You're not
Yeah.
going to see people wanting to change it. They don't want to change it. There's no noble science that's going on where people are, oh, we're trying to find a cure for so and so. That's not a thing anymore. It's really not.
I wanted to say that if you do have conspiratorial thinking, then my theory bodes very well for that.
Mhm.
Because if you look at the two things that my theory says aren't diseases, obesity and cancer, those are
Mhm.
things that are heavily pushed in the mainstream. as epidemics. They say we have an obesity epidemic and a cancer epidemic, and we have to aggressively treat them with pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, in the cancer case, they push chemo, and then in the obesity case, they push the GLP-1 drugs. And I know, Liz, you've done
Mm-hmm.
some videos on GLP-1s and the dangers of those. And you've mentioned how massive the money-making businesses around cancer. Well, it's also huge around obesity as well, right? They're making
Mm-hmm.
billions and billions of dollars around treating obesity. And I'm saying obesity is actually a protective defense mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
and it should not be thought of as a disease. So it really bodes well for that kind of conspiratorial thinking. And I also wanted to touch on something that you mentioned at the beginning, which is how AI can be a useful tool. And really what AI is doing is, it's not easy to read 30 medical papers in 5 seconds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's what AI is kind of doing, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
pulling from all these medical papers that people have done, good research on,
Mm-hmm.
and it's summarizing it in a very short period of time. And so everything that I've talked about is from the medical literature. So it's really like when I talk
Mm-hmm.
about microplastics being stored,
Mm-hmm.
or forever chemicals being stored in cancer cells, that's from the medical literature.
Mm-hmm.
There's a paper that says that oxalates is stored 10 times higher in cancer tissue than in normal
Mm-hmm.
breast tissue, and so that's like literally from the medical literature. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, um, so I just wanted to point out that AI is a very useful tool, and there are tricks. Like you said, I am a little bit worried about how the AI might be doctored in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so people should try to learn tricks like, don't just type in, is this chemical a toxin? Because if you
Mm-hmm.
do, you won't get the answer you necessarily want. Instead, people should type in, does this chemical create ROS in the body? And that's
Mm-hmm.
a cheat code to learning if that chemical is a toxin. So, for example, if you type in, is glucose a toxin? Is estrogen
Mm-hmm.
a toxin? You're not going to get a good answer from
Mm-mm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So type in this, is this chemical, does it create ROS? And then that
Mm-hmm.
actually gives you the right answer.
Yeah.
So there's little cheats that you can play there. But yeah, I totally agree also with your point to the effect of we're not eating real
Mm-hmm.
food, real human food.
Mm-mm.
And that's been going on, like you said, for a century. All these things, seed oils, obviously these are
Mm-hmm.
industrial chemicals. Those are toxins in my theory that
Mm-hmm.
cancer cells are rapidly trying to sequester and store. That's not real food. And of course, it
Mm-hmm.
goes on and on and on. Yeah.
Yeah. And the one thing about seed oils, which is interesting, is and it goes back to all common sense. Like what I'm looking at when I look at the history is, and I'm a big history person, is that when Procter and Gamble, when they started their thing in Cincinnati, the reason they were in Cincinnati is because of the hog butchering business was big there, and they needed the fats. They need the animal fats to make candles and soap, I believe, is what they were making. And so they started their business there because that's where all of that butchering was done. And they wanted a cheaper way to make their candles and soap. And so they started looking at the industrial lubricants. And then at some point, someone decided, hey, let's fry food in it and make people eat it. I mean, think about that for a minute. That's like all of a sudden, you've got somebody out in the garage and they've got a can of gasoline and they just pour you a glass and go, hey, let's just start drinking this stuff. It's like, that's not food. And nobody looked at, hey, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Is this going to make people sick? And I think that because it makes people sick over such a long period of time, like it
Mm.
takes a while. It's a killer, but it's going
Hmm.
to take time to do it. It takes time to do its work. So, and now you've got so many people that are addicted. I was like a carb addict. I was addicted to sugar. I was addicted to all the worst things.
Hmm.
And then a lot of I know some chemists that I went to school with or whatever, and they ended up being food chemists, and they're like searching for the bliss point. So they're looking for the perfect combination to keep you eating and eating and eating and eating and eating. So I mean, that's just evil. I mean,
Mm.
honestly, if you look at the what it's doing to the country, like we don't use our brains anymore. We don't ask why, and we don't challenge authority. A lot of this is authority bias. You know, people worship doctors too, which, you know, again, I will say this because we have to say this for both of us. It's like, we are not giving medical advice or telling
Right.
anybody, you know, this has nothing to do with medical advice, not telling anybody how to treat anything or mitigate any kind of disease. If people just start thinking about the absurdity of everything and the fact that we're not even
Yep.
eating food, it's like, you know, you're getting down, you looking at these cancer, the reasons potentially for the tumors and
Hmm.
everything is like, it's a perfect explanation. I mean, I'm just like, I've never heard anything that made any more sense than this, to be honest, because
Thank you. Yeah.
you're not villainizing the body as just weak and pathetic. And yeah, okay, we were around for, you know, all these years and throughout history. It's like, no, we wouldn't have been able to get out of the bed without killing ourselves if we were that weak and pathetic and like broken. You know, it just
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense. We would not be the apex like predators if we would not still be here if we were that defective, right? You know,
Right.
so something is going on, and that, I think it's just a perfect explanation. But
Yeah, thank you. And you can see how it's a kind of brainwashing scheme to get you
mm,
feeling like you're helpless. Because if they say, "Oh,
mhm,
your body is faulty and it's
mhm,
weak and your genes are faulty, but we can help you. We
mhm,
have these wonderful
mhm,
pharmaceuticals for you to take to
yep,
fix you because you need to rely on us." It keeps people reliant and
mhm,
and helpless. And so
mhm,
yeah, so the brainwashing is a key part of the business model.
mhm,
And like you said, it even goes beyond cancer. You mentioned fibromyalgia. It feels like
mhm,
anytime they use a big word
mhm,
to explain something, they're not explaining anything, first of all.
mhm,
And the bigger the word, the less they understand about it.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so autoimmune diseases now
mhm,
look very suspicious, and because they're yet another framing of oh, your body's messed up because it's attacking
mhm,
itself, your
mhm,
body's faulty. So
mhm,
that's yet another thing that I'm looking into, that and other people in the carnivore community.
mhm.
I think Anthony Chapey is also looking
Oh
into
yeah.
it. And but it looks very much connected to toxicity. And you
Mhm.
mentioned how they just diagnose things without really looking at proof, and they just say, "Oh, you
Yeah.
got antibodies."
Mhm.
Like you got
Mhm.
antibodies, so that must
Mhm.
mean your body's attacking itself.
Yep.
But if toxins that you eat in your food
Mhm.
destroy your body's tissue, and then the body's like, "Oh, now I have all this cellular debris floating around. I better
Mhm.
clean it up."
Mhm.
And has to recruit the immune system to clean up the mess that the toxins created. And then they interpret that as the body attacked itself. That's my view of autoimmune diseases: is
Mhm.
toxins destroy the body's tissue, and then the body has to clean it up with its immune
Mhm.
system after the fact. You
Yep.
know, and
Mhm.
they just say, "Oh, you have antibodies, so that must mean, it's autoimmune."
It's very promising that you have put this together because, you know, when you have a sea of uncertainty and invalid things, like just things that are not valid, you know, the medical industry and how they approach disease and the whole thing of, you know, all this autoimmunity. And it's like, well, you're just attacking yourself because
Hmm.
reasons, you know. It's like, but I really
Right.
appreciate you presenting all of this because it's right up my alley.
Thanks so much
Yeah.
for having me on, and definitely
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity to share it with people. And like I said, we try to appeal to the common sense, and I want
Mhm.
people to think logically. Everything I put out
Mhm.
there, people can
Mhm.
check, right? Like, this is all
Mhm.
from the medical literature.
Yep.
So, I definitely want the audience to check my work, right? And
Yeah.
like, and just think about it. And I believe chronic disease is not that complicated. It's actually somewhat simple in the sense that
Mhm.
toxins are the primary cause of chronic disease. We
Mhm.
give the diseases different names when the toxicity occurs in different tissues. When it
Mhm.
occurs in your thyroid, it's called Hashimoto's. When it occurs in your arteries, it's called cardiovascular disease. When it
Mhm.
occurs in your brain, it's called Alzheimer's or Parkinson's.
Mhm.
So we give it different names depending on where the toxicity occurs.
Mhm.
But then anytime the body creates extra tissue, that's not a disease. That's
Mhm.
actually a storage mechanism. So
Mhm.
that's why cancer and obesity and visceral
Mhm.
fat, these are not diseases.
Mm.
So when the body does something on purpose. So that's my
Um,
theory in a nutshell. And like,
yeah.
yeah, that's
And
it.
that sounds great. So, and I think the audience will be really interested in this. So, thank you so much for coming, and we're gonna have to do this again because there's so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
But make sure you guys remember to hit the notification bell and do all that subscribing stuff so that you don't miss out on content like this. And again, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.